Hey, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Leadership Tales podcast. Today, joined by an amazing gentleman, Rob Newson, who is ex-Navy SEALs, worked in the White House, in the military attachment to the White House, is now working on an area of cancer and special ops. Again, today, you'll also hear about the story about his other bit of work that he did in the 76ers and the sports team there, sports franchise. But I think that the key thing for me that we're going to hear today is this red thread about the honor and integrity about his life, his work, and what he's done. You're going to hear about the care for others. You're going to hear about the vulnerability. You're going to hear about the being willing to ask for help, but also the really serious issue around cancer in the military and what he's doing to help that and support that. Hashtag swarm cancer is his hashtag around what he's trying to do in there. So enjoy the episode. You will love it. Rob, welcome. Welcome to the Leadership Tales podcast. Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Good. So for the listeners, Rob, tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us a bit about your background.
Yeah. So my dad was in the Navy and retired in mid-70s, and we moved back to Kansas, which was his and my mom's home state. So I grew up in a small town called Wellsville, Kansas. Was fortunate enough to get a Navy ROTC scholarship and went to the University of Kansas, where I walked on the football team and played 5 seasons, redshirting one season, but I was with the team for 5 seasons. Got my commission in the Navy and went to the SEAL teams. I spent just under 30 years in the SEAL teams, leading at every level, rising to the rank of captain, 06. And I retired in 2018. My first marriage ended about 7 years in, and I became a single parent raising our 3 small children who were 5, 4, and 2 at the time. So that was a very unique experience, being a single dad in the mid 90s. I'm with the love of my life now, who's just makes everything better and really, helped our family take a broader perspective on what love and action on love is all about. So I retired in 2018. I worked a year at the White House military office. Really great experience serving in the White House, working in the East Wing, and just being in the building with so much history and gravitas, and working with the best that the military has to offer. Air Force One, Marine One, Camp David, the White House Medical Office, just tremendous people.
I can imagine.
So after that year, I took a break and finished my PhD from the University of San Diego in leadership studies. Picked up a job with the Philadelphia 76ers. The title was Vice President of Strategy and Vision, but it evolved basically to Chief of Staff function for the General Manager, Elton Brand, who's just a great man, great leader. I really enjoyed working with him and working with Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment, the corporate headquarters that runs 2 or 3 teams and lots of businesses. But just a great experience there.
How did you get into that? I'm fascinated by the leap into there,
Yeah.
So come here and do Vice President of Strategy. And
very rare, right? I think I was the only guy with that title and that kind of job. We tailored it for me, but I got the introduction. There's a great organization that supports special operators, people from the special operations community in transition. It's called the Honor Foundation. So the Honor Foundation basically runs a 3-month kind of executive course on transition and helping you understand who you are, what you want. I was involved with them for many years, starting around 2007, I think. So when I left the White House, I reached out to them and I said, hey, I'm looking for something incredibly far afield. I don't want government service. I don't want contracting. What's the weirdest thing you have? And they laughed and they said, look, we've got this guy, former Navy guy, who is at the 76ers. He constantly calls us and wants to interview a SEAL to be the vice president of athlete care.
Right.
And I laughed and I said, look, I don't even know what athlete care is, but that's far enough afield. And I think I'd like to talk to them.
Yeah.
So I talked to Alex Rucker, the executive vice president of basketball operations at the time. We hit it off. I talked to Elton Brand, had multiple interviews. In one of the interviews, it was a panel of other vice presidents. And one of the guys said, why are you so excited about being in the NBA?
Yeah.
And I said, look, I'm not. I don't know anything about the NBA. I don't follow professional sports. But what you guys are talking about on the staff is teams, leadership, and culture. That's what I care about. That's what I'm passionate about. And I think I can help with that. And so that really resonated with them. Had great conversations with Elton about culture and leadership. And they were really interested in exploring how you develop championship culture in the staff, right? I wasn't messing around with the players, the coaches, and close staff on the travel team. Really focus on that culture. But in sports teams, right, there's often this tremendous focus on the culture of the team, meaning for NBA, 17 players and coaches and that small staff, and not a lot of attention on the culture of the organization and the staff and the people that support all of that, right? The bottom part of the pyramid. So that's what we were talking about is what's the culture of the organization and the staff.
I love that because, my favorite team in soccer is Newcastle United, and they, the coach, underrated coach in my opinion, but what he's done is he's built the behind the scenes staff.
Yeah.
And with the rest of the team, and you can't underestimate the impact that having a supportive, functional team behind that is important. I presume that's the same with the SEALs and how you operate that as well, because we see the TV and the movies with, everybody as the SEALs at the front, but there's such a huge organization behind it. So is that just deploying that? Yeah.
It is, right? It's partially applying what I learned and developed in the SEAL teams. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to help write the Navy SEAL ethos. We took about 30 guys, put them on an island, and kind of wrote this document that says this is who we are. And so that was a great experience. And as a strategist within the SEAL teams, a lot of my focus was on culture and standards and applying it to the future. So it was an alternate application of things I already knew. And SEALs and special operators, that's what makes them so unique is they are problem solvers and are having an innate ability to combine and adapt to whatever environment while still bringing the same skills of innovation and ingenuity and adaptability to the problem set. So that's basically what I was doing with the 76ers, and it was very interesting and fascinating.
I can imagine. No, Cockleshell Heroes is one of the movies. One of my ex-Special Forces friends who used to work with me, and he said, watch that movie and you'll get a sense of it. It was put people into Scotland on a train with no money, and they had to get back to the base, and that was the original training in there. And that's the problem solving, isn't it? So
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So 76 is successful? Yeah, for those who don't know the sport. Yeah.
Well, they're as a team and a franchise, very storied. They have 3 NBA championships to their name. Dr. Julius Erving, Dr. J and Charles Barkley are 2 of our famous players. We have probably 2 of the best players in the league right now, and they're sitting at currently third in the conference, and hoping to do a long and deep run into the playoffs.
So what's your free throw technique like? Have you improved?
I haven't even touched the court since high school, so I would have to guess it's very poor.
Amazing. Such a story. I just want to dip into the White House because, when you get a clash of different cultures, SEAL, very different, and then getting into the White House and thinking about the political and almost depoliticizing of that in a lot of cases
Yeah.
in terms of what you're doing. How did you find that? Because for me, I'm not a political animal and I really struggle going into a political environment and working in there. But it sounds like you had a really good experience in there. How did you
It
find
was a fantastic experience. One of the best leaders I've known in the
it?
SEAL teams or anywhere else was in charge of the White House Military Office, Admiral Keith Davids. Really, the tone and the culture comes from the leader. And we were fortunate in the White House Military Office. Our job was military support to the president, right? Moving him, protecting him from a communications perspective, from a health perspective. There's no politics involved in that,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
We're just providing Department of Defense support at the highest presidential standard of service, and so we were a bit removed from the politics of the day, if you will. But still, I had friends and people I knew that would comment about the White House, like, "Oh, I'd never go to the White House," and my return was, "Look, it doesn't matter who sits in the White House. It's the people's house."
Yeah.
And there's so much history and gravitas to the place that I think everyone should try to visit, regardless of if you support the current president or the politics of what's going on. It's an amazing piece of American history, as a lot of Washington D.C. is. So
yeah,
I was fortunate not to be drawn into the politics of it.
Good. And we won't be on this. So let's move on to what you're working on now, because I love the fact that you've moved on. The team's leadership and culture, I could talk about all day and just dip into your thinking on that, which I'd love to do at some certain point. But the focus on cancer and special ops is your primary focus now. Is that right? Apart from the 76ers? Yeah.
Yeah. So when I left the 76ers, part of it was a great time for transition. My entire time with the 76ers was during the pandemic, and I was working remotely and was able to be with family in San Diego and planted roots and revived roots. So I wasn't ready to go back to Philadelphia. But I was also looking for point of contribution, and I had cancer myself in 2017, surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, hormone therapy. And, that's a tough road for anybody. But then I tell people, it's like when you buy a red car and then you're like, oh, wow, there's red cars all over the place. You're primed to see things that you weren't. And once I had cancer, people would come up to me and talk about other teammates. And did you hear about Bill and John and Joe? And they have cancer too. And it was just shocking how many teammates had cancer at a fairly young age, right? Cancer is normally in the 60s and 70s. So we had very young, healthy, active people with aggressive and often rare cancers. There was a group of us that realized something was going on and started to agitate for action and attention. And so I've been working with a bunch of veteran support organizations that support special operations and or are focused on cancer in the military. The Hunter 7 Foundation is a phenomenal organization that's doing great work in research and awareness. But I really wanted to try to move the ball forward. We're working on awareness. We're working on pathways to treatment, genomics, and individualized medicine and immunotherapy are really coming into their own and are the future of cancer. So I've been working with organizations that will provide that to special operations soldiers and sailors and Marines, both women and men, who are, survived war and all kinds of difficulty, and you come home and you're faced with a fight of your life you never expected. And so we're trying to circle the support in education, awareness, and treatment and research, all critically important stuff. And the U.S. Special Operations Command is working for active duty folks to figure out how they take care of them on the cancer front. And we've kind of got a coalition of the willing. And I talk about a swarm where people are coming from wherever they are and swarming on cancer. So we're trying to do that for the veteran community.
Amazing. Tell me a bit about the stats, because when we were first talking about this, the correlation is so much higher in the special ops than other areas, and the research that says why is this the case, is that clear at the moment, or is that still being worked out?
No, and so most of where we have a sense, and in the military would call it indications and warnings, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have intelligence and clear facts, then you have facts, and you can say this is what's happening. When you don't have that, you have indications and warnings, which mean I don't know if this is really happening, but this is saying it could be happening. And so anecdotally, we're seeing just an enormous number of service members, both in special operations and the broader military, who have very aggressive cancers, very young. There's not enough research and there's not enough data right now to definitively say this is what's going on. And so we're supporting research just in the initial stages on the facts of the numbers, right? What are the percentages? One of the numbers that Hunter 7 puts out is that for active duty military, it's the chances of receiving cancer is 1 in 7. That's not factors higher than the general population. But if you think about the general population, their cancer, peaks in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And you think about the population of the military, which is in the 20s, 30s, and 40s primarily, there's a huge problem going on. If 1 in 7 for people that, the average age is around 30 or 40 and young as 20, something is going on. So we think partially it's toxic exposure. Mm-hmm. And, that increases with war. War is incredibly toxic. I did a small study on toxic exposure going back to Vietnam and Agent Orange and the Desert Storm and the syndrome related to that. And of course, 9/11 toxic exposure. And so we think we're just seeing high levels of toxicity from war. And for special operators, that includes just the vast amounts of bullets and explosives that we expend, often indoors in shoot houses, that can add significant toxic exposure. But you add to that lifestyle exposure.
Yeah.
The World Health Organization a couple of years ago said that night shifts, right, working night shifts is a carcinogen. It messes with your body so much that it increases likelihood of cancer. Well, the military works at night when you're doing your missions, especially special operations. It's a lot of night work. It's a lot of disrupted sleep. And so there's lifestyle impacts and exposures that are affected. And then there's environmental exposures. We're going to places that have high levels of toxicity too. And so you put all those three together with high stress and increased vulnerability to inflammation, and it's just a toxic brew of increased opportunity to have cancer. It was interesting. There's a trend just across military toxic exposure that the institution wants facts, and so they'll say there are no hard facts that this is happening. And this happened in Vietnam, this happened in Desert Storm, and it took 40 years since Desert Storm to definitively identify that was caused the syndrome was caused by sarin gas exposure. The research that's definitive lags so far behind the actual need for treatment and care that most of the people are dead by the time you can say this is why it happened. And so we probably won't know definitively why military people and special operators are in the fight with cancer for decades. So we hope to speed that up. The great genomics and DNA testing now may be able to shorten the timeline of research. But regardless of why it's happening, I think the first thing is awareness that people have increased toxic exposure, awareness that they need to tell their care providers they should be screened early and often, regardless if it's a standard of care, right? The standard of care for prostate cancer or colonoscopy or whatever probably should be accelerated for people who have higher exposures. And so knowing that you can take some action yourself and with your care providers, and there's new screening tests that test for 50 different types of cancers with just a blood draw. And so, we're trying to figure out how that's implemented at scale so that you can discover you may have cancer in stage 0 or stage 1. And really what we're seeing now is because it's young, active, healthy people, when they go to a doctor and say, I've got this problem, the first thought isn't cancer. And so often those diagnoses are missed until they can't be denied, and it's stage 4 and it's staring, the medical community in the face. Okay, now you have stage 4 cancer. And really, you're making terminal life decisions. You're not making decisions about how you're going to fight cancer because it's caught so late. And that's what's absolutely critical to this effort is early screening and awareness by the medical community that standard of care probably needs to be adjusted for special operators and military folks who have a higher risk of cancer.
Yeah, high intensity screening comes in. I mean, it's interesting. Just personally going and doing my medicals recently in Singapore, and in Singapore they do screen everything, the ultrasound.
Yeah.
But it's that, at my age, it's more my worry that, as you say, my cancer levels or cancer risk is higher.
Yeah.
But actually getting people to be and having that as part of our lifestyle. But that's for the wider population. So I think a lot of the work and research you're doing will impact on the rest of the society.
Oh, there's no doubt. And that's part of special operations, right? Is I'm focused on special operations because that's my community, but also because it's a smaller population that is very adaptable and quick, and we can discover things and set standards, and the rest of the military, just like in military operations, can adapt the techniques and procedures that we're applying. And then, of course, that can be applied to broader civilian cancer fight as well. So I think this has a lot of application.
The impact of the culture in terms of willingness to ask for help, and I think this is quite a critical thing. I was just chatting to a client friend today about mental health, and he's going to come on the podcast at some point and talk about this, which is this willingness to shout out and say, look, I need some help. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
I've really been focused on that lately, and it applies to so many things within the SEAL teams and special operations community. But I think even more broadly, I'm working with a friend who's focused on the professional sports industry and players, and it's very similar there, we think. And one of the terms that he uses is identity paradox. And the paradox of having an elite identity, if you will, is it can capture you, and it becomes a need to be seen as box that you're trapped in. With the cancer fight, I've heard stories. I know people. I've been one of those people who didn't want to talk about my cancer. I told no one except my boss that I was going through a cancer fight. Not even my best friends. And part of that was I didn't want to see pity in their eyes. I didn't want to be responsible for managing their concern or trying to make them feel better about me fighting cancer. And so I thought, I'm just going to focus on myself. And I don't think I lacked for support. I had family there, and I wasn't lonely or isolated in the fight. But afterwards, I looked back and I thought, man, what opportunities did I miss to build deeper relationships with the people I care about by sharing my vulnerability, by allowing them to care and be part of the journey. So I regret that I didn't engage in that. But I tell you, I've heard multiple stories, tragic stories of great warriors who say, I'm a Green Beret. If I'm not a Green Beret, I'm nothing. Or I'm a Navy SEAL, and that's all that I am. And so when you're faced with fighting cancer or PTSD or traumatic brain injury, or so many other things that disrupt that identity, you pull inside and you don't share, you don't seek treatment. I've heard stories that I know are true. I've heard them firsthand from widows who said, my husband said, if I'm not this, then I'm nothing, and I'm stopping treatment, I'm deploying to war. And they died of cancer because they'd rather go fight with their buddies in war than accept that they have a life-threatening disease they need to fight, and that that conflicts with their identity. So we're really wrestling with this concept of identity paradox and how you can be captured by the very thing that you love and gives you so much sense of contribution and purpose in life. And again, that applies to professional sports, right? You spend your life to become a professional basketball player, or football player, or baseball player, or soccer player, and that's your identity. That's what people know you as. That's what you know yourself as and how you define yourself. It applies both when you're having a bad game or a bad season, right? If I had a bad game, then I must be a bad person because that's all I am. And we've seen players and athletes from Simone Biles to world-class swimmers and tennis players and basketball players who really struggle. And I think part of it is the system forces them to be singular focused, right? To excel, you have to make your life almost all about that. But at some point, hopefully, someone will encourage you and you will expand your life with other interests. And if you're singularly focused on one thing, that's just a recipe for disaster. And when it's not very resilient, I would suppose. And when you're hit with psychological issues or cancer or anything else that's challenging, if you're not well-rounded, it just makes it so harder to respond. But getting back to being trapped inside this identity paradox, it makes it so difficult to be vulnerable and ask for help.
And it's not just professional sports people or special ops, because it affects a lot of people. I remember a number of my dad's era who had the identity and then retired and then lost this identity and so quickly went downhill. And there's a number of things in here. And it's interesting because we start to ask people to shape your identity, and we've got to be careful that we don't shape this one identity, or in some cases a false identity which doesn't fit with that person's lifestyle as well. So
well, you made a great point, right? I think we're transitions, liminal states where you're moving from one state to another. Transitions are the most difficult in life. And so really we started thinking about this stuff in military transitions, special operations transitions, and transition of professional athletes or Olympic athletes. They spent their life doing this thing and now they have to move. But we quickly realized that it's not just at that transition point, it's in your entire career that you need to build that broader identity know yourself more than know that you are more than what you do, I
Mm.
suppose. But I still struggle with this. You you have a vision of who you are,
Mm.
and so even with those closest to you, you want them to see you in your best light, and so it's very difficult to be vulnerable and ask for help and say, look, I'm struggling. Or I realized when I was going through cancer, it's not a binary choice between telling no one or telling everyone.
Yeah.
And then with the people you tell, it's often in conversations of kind of what the limits are. I
Mm.
think if I would have went to my best friends and said, look, I'm going through cancer, it's going to be rough. I don't want you to ask about it every single day. I don't want cancer to define me, right? And
Mm.
that's often what happens is when people that love you, care about you, know you, they're going to say, hey, how you doing?
Mm.
In that very sad,
Yeah.
that's the last thing you need to do is run through that over and over throughout your day. So I think
Mm.
if I would have set limits the way with the people I care about and love and want in my life, then they would have respected that, and they would have known how to bring their best selves to help me be my best self. And really, that's I've written that it's ironic for SEAL teams and special operators, the best teammates in the world are the ones who are most reluctant to depend on the team when they need it, and it's
Interesting.
just so sad.
Yeah. Wow. What a note. Well, I want to go into a more positive aspect because when
Yeah,
you were chatting about the lady who you love and has been a bringer of the family together, you told me these three great criteria when she was helping you make choices about whether you should go to the White House, and she gave you the three criteria of important, different, and happy. And I think you've lived that in your
yeah.
life when you look at it. But I wanted just you to tell the story of important, different, happy, because I think those are three great questions for a
Oh, it's
career change.
fantastic. She's so smart and such a great teammate. So I was retiring from the Navy. I was in Miami, Florida, planning to move back home to San Diego, California. And I didn't know what job I was going to do, but I knew I wanted to be home. A good friend and teammate, Admiral Keith Davids, received my retirement invitation. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going back to San Diego." He said, "Listen, I want you to think about coming to Washington, D.C., becoming a senior executive in DoD civilian service and working in the White House." And of course, what a great honor to have that offer. And she was visiting me in Miami as I was wrapping up my tour there. And Keith and his wife, also a Navy admiral, called and said, "Hey, Rob, what do you think?" And I was getting ready to say no.
Ah.
And Kimberly said, "Keith, we'll call you back." And so we hung up the phone, and she said, "Look, here's how I think you need to think about this.
Mm.
Is the job that he wants you to take, is it important?
Mm.
And important to the nation, important to the larger scheme of things. Will it make a difference if you were there? And will you be happy?" And I think part of that happiness is, will you have a sense of contribution and satisfaction
Mm.
in this role? And I said yes to all three. And she said, "Well, there's your answer. You have to do this."
Hmm.
And so we did it. And we had a wonderful time in DC with amazing people. I learned so much. It was just a great opportunity. I think you're exactly right that I've been fortunate in my military career, and that's how we make decisions now.
Mm.
Is it important? Will we make a difference? Will we be satisfied with the level of contribution and sense of who we are and what we're doing and who we're with?
Mm.
And all of that goes into happiness, right? So
Amazing.
I've been taking my time uh, as I've been doing the cancer stuff in special operations. I've been taking my time to slowly job search. I have a unique background with unique capabilities, and so you just don't drop a resume on people. You have to kind of get discovered and find the right place. So I've got two or three opportunities now, and I'm trying to run through that and take
Mm.
several months. Okay, is this the place where I'm going to find my tribe and people that I love to be with, and we're making a contribution that matters, and it's making us happy and setting us up for the future. So yeah, what a tremendous criteria that she laid out for me that we continue to use today.
Remind me of her name so we can give her credit.
Yeah, Kimberly, a
Kimberly.
wonderful ER doctor and former Navy vet that we've been together for 26 years now.
Wow. Everybody needs a Kimberly in their life, it sounds like, just to give that bit of advice. I love that. So
No
brilliant.
doubt. Makes everything better.
We're going to finish, sir, on 3 questions. So, and I'm fascinated to get your answers on this. But the first one I think I know from our previous conversation, but what's the one memorable moment in your life that's really shaped your leadership? Small but memorable, that's shaped the leadership.
It's intertwined between one of my first interactions in the Navy at the SEAL teams and one of the most recent. At SEAL Team 5, we had this Master Chief they called Crazy Mac, and it was Master Chief McIntosh. Tall, Jamaican, just no filters whatsoever, and a hilarious man. And I was walking across the grinder, kind of our yard in the back, and he came running up to me. He said, "Ensign, Ensign." And so I stopped, and he said, "Who will help you?" That's all he said. "Who will help you?" You know, it's usually stump the chump with the new guy at the SEAL teams, and I'm an ensign. And so I sit there and ponder it in silence. And then I turn to him, and I think I've got the answer. And I say, "Anyone I ask, Master Chief?" And he said, "That is right. Don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it." And that was just one passing conversation with the very senior enlisted guy who was trying to mentor a very new officer. But that stuck with me for so long, my entire life. Who will help you? Anyone you ask is almost anyone you ask. And the problem is we don't ask.
No, agreed.
Which brings us full circle. We recently lost the CO of SEAL Team 1, a wonderful man, father, leader. He never told anyone, to my knowledge, that he was struggling. You know, he left far too soon under this weight of whatever he was wrestling with, right? People go to combat and they lose friends and teammates, and they deal with moral injury and physical injury. So I don't know what he was wrestling with, but I know that he never asked for help. And to me, that's the biggest takeaway. Is the most memorable leadership point is ask for help and look for people who need help.
Yeah. Thanks to Crazy Mac. I love that name. Just gives you a vision of what that person was like, but what a lesson. Yeah.
On so many levels.
So second question, if you had one thing you would disrupt in leaders nowadays, what would it be? One thing.
It's the frenetic hamster wheel of just activity, right? It's so hard. I've worked with senior leaders from the 4-star level to CEOs to NBA general managers. It's so hard to get them to pause and think and interact in a deep way because they've got so much going on. They are great at getting a lot of things done. The disruption, I think, is just getting leaders to pause and engage and stop thinking about the 25 other things that they need to do, that they are going to do next, and just be in the moment and engage. One of my most grateful introductions when I was with the 76ers was to meet Scott O'Neill. Scott was the CEO of Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment and is now the CEO of Merlin Entertainment. But he was a guy that was present and engaged at a personal level. He cared about people. And there's a great story where they hired a new guy. He showed up in the traditional suit and tie, and and Scott could tell he was very uncomfortable. He's like, dude, what are you doing? Be yourself. Just be yourself. I don't care what you wear, but be yourself. And that's the kind of disruption in leadership, right? That he wasn't worried about what he was going to do. He was engaging in a person on a human level. And that's, to me, is what's so needed in our leadership.
I love that. Love that story. The suit and tie is a classic, though, isn't it? I once had the first person I worked with turned up in what I would call a disco suit and a disco tie, and I was given the job of going and talking to them about what was appropriate address at the time, and it was just, what is appropriate dress? Yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah, be yourself. I love that. Final question then. So what is the one leadership habit for you that's non-negotiable that you would tell everybody?
Yeah, I think it's what always returns to me is honor and integrity. When you're in senior leader positions, and often people who are in your organization and care and respect you, they want to take care of you, right? We were in Yemen. I was a task force commander for a special operations task force in Yemen, and we had screwed up. I had a very well-intentioned junior officer like, hey, sir, we could spin it like this, we could do that. And I immediately thought, I appreciate the effort, right, of, hey, trying to take care of me so I don't get in trouble in the organization. But it comes down to integrity and honor, and we're going to take our lumps. We screwed up, and we need to come forward and say, yeah, we did that. It was wrong. And if I get fired, I get fired. But I'm not going to compromise my integrity and my honor and what I think is right for continuing in a job or making my life easier.
Those red threads that you've had through this conversation, Rob, are just excellent. And I hear the honor, I hear the integrity, I hear your work in cancer, I hear the care, I hear the vulnerability, and sharing that in the stories. And it's been a delight for me to have you on and for you to share the stories with people. So thank you. Now, if people want to find out a bit more about you and make contact, a bit about the work on the cancer, how would they find out about it?
Yeah, I publish frequently on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, Rob Newson, San Diego, would be able to find me. My hashtag that I use a lot is #SwarmCancer. So if you use that in LinkedIn, you'll see a lot of my posts.
Sir, it was a delight. I hope at some point to get the chance to meet you face to face. It'd be brilliant. But enjoy what sounds like inclement weather that you're suffering at the moment. Hope it gets better. Yeah.
Even San Diego bad weather is better than anywhere else in the world. I love my town. You're welcome to visit anytime.
I would love to. Thank you, Rob, for coming on.
It's a pleasure, Colin. Thank you.
Well, that was Rob. There's times where you just feel you could talk to somebody forever around many different topics, serious topics around the cancer, about the exploration of that concept of being willing to ask for help, sharing the identity piece that we talked about today, the identity paradox that he was talking about with the work he's got in there with special ops. I also just love the story of Kimberly and the three pieces about important, different, and happy. And I think three simple questions we could ask ourselves when we transition, as we talked about transitions today, when we go in different routes. How important is it? How different can I make this in terms of making a difference? And then finally, how happy will it make me in terms of what I do? So, Rob, brilliant episodes. Thank you for listening in. I look forward to welcoming you back another episode of the Leadership Tales podcast very soon.